Wayne Dorsey. I am the founder and executive director of the Safe Ride Foundation. We're the only nonprofit in Frederick County working to stop drunk driving and also help with transportation instability for low-income families and the elderly. We run two amazing programs that people know us for. First one being our baby, which is the SOS Safe Ride program. SOS is a nonprofit ride service / designated driving program that drives you home in your vehicle if you have too much to drink. So it works a lot like Uber, but we drive your car home too. So the way it works is basically you go out to the bar, you want to have 2 drinks and you have 11, and basically we send 2 volunteers and one of us drives your car home for you. So very cool. And the other program we have is Rides for Good, which is more of a traditional ride service, but that's helping people get to the human services that matter most. So we're helping people get to the doctor, helping people get to the grocery store, and even get to work, things like that. So we've been around for 10 years, and we've now been pleased to have prevented over 19,000 DUIs here in Frederick County. And all that to say, it's been a wild ride, for lack of a better term. Now, that said, I have been doing this for 10 years. I was 23 when I started. And when I started, basically, the way I would put this is that nobody cared, right? So it was myself and my board at the time, which was my girlfriend at the time, and my mother. That was the board, right? Of the 3 of us. And then, but the reason for that is because we started our nonprofit the way that most nonprofits start, which is not the way that the IRS wants you to. The IRS pictures, you get 4 old guys that really care about climate change, and then basically like they get together, they form a board, and they hire an executive director that does all of the actual work, and then they get to advise that person until the end of time. That's how they think it's supposed to work. The reality is, I was a 23-year-old black kid who just thought he was uniquely positioned to help with drunk driving, and then I started myself. I was the board, and with my 2 people I mentioned, and then it went from there, right? That said, 10 years go by, and then now it looks like this. This is my company. So all that to say, this is what it's turned into in 10 years. I was 23 when I started. I'm 34 now. I'm a man now. Anyway, so all that to say, there's me, founder, executive director, whatever you want to call it, right? And then we do have a board, which is all volunteers of people that like are help as like advisory. They're basically in an advisory role, if it makes any sense, right? They don't necessarily do any of the day-to-day, but they're there because 1, you need a board, and 2, they're very helpful, right? And then we have our 2 programs. We have other programs as well, but these are our 2 main ones, right? I want you to note the colors here, right? And all the ones that are orange, they're all volunteer positions. So we have about 100 volunteers that either drive for SOS or drive for Rides for Good, right? And these are all managed by our staff. So obviously there's me, and then there's my assistant, and then our business development intern that does a lot of the networking, like in-person marketing types of things. There's our social media manager who does a lot of our content, things like that. My assistant is our highest paid employee besides me. She's like my third arm, my third hand, whatever you want to call it. But she does other duties as assigned. That's her entire job. Then there's the SOS staff, which is the manager of SOS, right? Who basically manages all the volunteers, answers the phones, stuff like that. And then the assistant who basically fills in whenever he cannot. And then on the Rides for Good side, you have the manager of Rides for Good. And if you were at the Ask Me Anything yesterday, that's my lovely wife. And that said, they have a paid driver that's underneath of her who basically helps to like fill in the gaps that the volunteers can't. The programs work very differently, but that doesn't really matter right here. But the biggest thing I want you to note are these people down here. I have 5 full-time employees, including myself, right? But I always say I have 5 that are here, but I have 12 total, right? If you count all of my overseas talent as well, right? And we have 15 total if you count all the part-timers too. Now that said, the overseas contractors are basically the people that like do a lot of the tasks that don't need to be here in the U.S. So at least in our organization. And so I have here, if you can read it, there's our video editor is in the Philippines. Our accountant is in Dubai. Our mobile app developers are both in the Philippines. And then same with our paid ads manager, our web designer, our grant writer is in the Philippines, and also our graphic designer as well. He's actually in Morocco. But we have 12 employees in 4 time zones. And so it's been interesting kind of seeing, how it's like a worldwide organization, but not really. That's centered right here in Frederick. So I'm using this to illustrate a point here, which is that basically there are certain positions that make sense to be here in the US, depending on your organization, and some things that like, hey, I could have this here, but I get the same amount of work or the same level of work regardless of like where their time zone is, right? So I'll show you this. Basically, this is my philosophy on what to outsource and where, in my opinion, right? So for me, and again, this is my experience, is that here in the US, right, I think about things that you literally cannot do remotely, right? So in our case, driving, right? If you run a restaurant, you can't have someone that's in Morocco cooking your steaks, right? I go to a lot of networking events. Obviously, someone overseas can't do that. If you're doing car repairs, you see what I'm saying? All these things you can't do. Then you have like things like content creation. People get really scared about, oh, I would hate it if someone outsourced my social media managing like business like overseas. My thing is, like, you guys have met Corey, who's the person that does our social media management. Like, we're here in Frederick, and so it doesn't make sense for somebody overseas to try and make content about SOS Safe Ride, because Corey's the one that goes to the bars and does the filming. He's the one that writes the scripts and really creates the content. Now, on the other end, you have our video editor. So Corey can make the content, and then all the stuff that requires like real desk work, that can be done overseas. But like Corey himself, like that's where I would call that irreplaceable in terms of, yeah, the protection of his job, I guess you could put it. Then you have things like in-person management, right? So Michael, who runs SOS, obviously he has to be here at night, right? So I can't see that being outsourced by anybody else. You see what I'm saying? And then again, my third arm, my executive assistant, she literally just does everything that I need, point blank period. Can't have somebody overseas doing that. And then obviously our C-suite. But then over here on this side, I know I'm like reading the slides, but this is just like me saying this in my own words, where like I think about all the things that, you know, that if they're not in like the US, does that take away from their work? So like I look at like things like, say, graphic design, right? Where if you're someone who's trying to design like something here in town for a mural or something like that for Frederick, yeah, that needs to be here. But if I'm trying to make a graphic if I was making this, I'd probably do that overseas. You hear what I'm saying? So that's like the philosophy there. But then I mentioned this, manager roles. Alex right here is running our tech team for our new app. All the developers that work underneath of him are overseas. See what I'm saying? So there's things that work and things that don't. That's my whole point here, right? So that's my philosophy on what makes sense and what doesn't. But I'm curious if when we get done here, like what your guys' like version of that is. Yeah. So next, where do you get them from? So people always wonder like where to look. Everybody knows about Fiverr, obviously, right? I use that for like one-off things, right? Hey, I need you to do the sound engineering on this video we made. That's probably a Fiverr thing, right? But if I say, hey, I need a full-time like front-end developer for my mobile app, right? I'm probably doing that full-time from like the Philippines or Latin America, right? And so basically there's pros and cons to both, right? Both of them, most of which being like time zone like type things, but that's where I find them. So these are two just like short examples of where I find them. There are other places to go to, but I think the gold standards are like online jobs and also a remote leverage VA. Yeah. Now next, I want to talk about, let's talk about money for a second, right? In my experience, we're a nonprofit, right? And so obviously we have to stretch a dollar in a way that other organizations don't. Nonprofit doesn't mean that you don't make money. Nonprofit means that your money doesn't go to the benefit of shareholders. That's the definition. And all that to say, when I think about what we have to do for a grant, it's usually about how can you make this, let's call it 10 grand or something like that, stretch as far as possible. Now I think about payroll and about what the amount of money that we've been able to save on payroll. So I'm just going to show you because this is public information anyway. You can go and look at our tax returns. So before we started outsourcing overseas, we were spending about 400 grand a year going out on payroll. That's every employee, every contractor, et cetera, put together, right? This is just straight up how much we've saved. It's like, and so look at those people that are at the bottom, right? If I were to hire people like, what do you call it, here in the US at US salaries, that is like probably what the savings are gonna be. And so it's just something to really like take into account here, that as far as the saving goes, that's a big thing. Moving on, I wanna talk about basically like what the pros and cons are of hiring overseas. Because when I think about it, people can get like cold feet when it comes to it because they think, oh, I don't know what I'm dealing with as far as language barrier. I don't know what I'm dealing with as far as what is fair to pay them, things like that, right? So positives, you would be blown away by two things. One, the amount of demand, and two, how fluent their English is, right? And I say they as like anyone who works overseas. I think we're very privileged here in the US that English is the universal language. But that said, I remember going into this thinking like, like I'm gonna have to like do all this. It's gonna be like pulling teeth trying to communicate. And again, I was pleasantly surprised. Biggest thing though is the demand. I'm gonna tell you a story. When I first wanted to hire someone overseas, I chose Philippines and I wanted to hire a web designer, right? I have a web design company too. And basically I was like, okay, I'm gonna just put a job description out and make a lay of the land, figure it out, right? So I put out a job description. I said, all right, based on my research, I'm gonna pay $750 a month for like basically unlimited web design. And I figured I would get crickets. I'm not kidding. I posted that. I got 80 applications that evening. Like the amount of volume that there is as far as as far as supply goes is, I mean, there's a lot of emotions you go through when it comes to that, but that's like my point here. I started looking through the resumes. I start seeing bachelor's degree, master's degree. I see things like their portfolios and how robust like their work was. And I'm just like, wow, I was absolutely just, get blown away. Now, then what happened was I started doing the interviews and stuff, hearing their English, right? And the level of warmth and like kindness and things like that. I just remember being genuinely just, I guess, again, I keep saying blown away, but that's what I mean. Now, those are the positives, but I think, and then obviously, yeah, money, fine, whatever, right? But that said, though, as far as the level of talent and the level of demand, that's the biggest thing I have to drive home here. So let's talk about the cons, though. First one, big one, stigmas, right? So obviously, people like you hear all kinds of things, like, oh, you're outsourcing jobs that could be for Americans here, or you're paying like things that aren't, you're not paying American wages and things like that. My thing that I would put to you is that just like pretty much anything else in the world, it's United States is the exception, not the rule. You know what I mean? And so when I remember like when I was talking about this web designer that I'm offering him like, hey, I'm going to pay you $700 a month, which is $4 an hour, by the way. Like I remember offering it to him and say, is that fair? And they go, oh my God, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to be able to do this for my family. I'm going to be able to buy this house, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what, really? And maybe that's just me being completely ignorant, but I just remember looking at one, the exchange rate, and then two, what the cost of living was. And I'm just like, wow, this is, okay, yeah, you hear what I'm saying. So as far as stigmas go, I would just put to you that that a lot of that is you, right? And that if you think that it's like that you're, like as far as like pay goes, I would say, hey, listen, offer what you feel is fair, right? And most times they agree, if that makes any sense. And so that's my version of that. There's more to it, but that's my version. Now, negatives. I would say a big thing that happens is, I mentioned it says bots and fake portfolios. My version of that is that when you're going through all those resumes, I mentioned there was like 80 in one night, right? A lot of them are like sometimes generated by bots, right? So you got to look out for that, obviously, just like any other thing. And when I say fake portfolios, you got to understand that demand is real on both sides, right? So if there is a high demand for us, meaning that like that if I go to put out a job description, I'm going to get a bunch of applications. What does that mean for them? That means that the job market is abysmal over there. You hear what I'm saying? And where I'm going with this is that there is a certain level of, hey, I have to position myself as well as possible so that I can get this overseas work. Meaning if I'm the Filipino or the Colombian or whatever, right? And there's room there for people to lie on their resume, right? And there's room there for people to, again, to take other people's work and pass it off as their own. And so that's where interviews come in. That's where vetting comes in. You hear what I'm saying? All right, so then next, let's talk about language barriers. Like I said, pleasantly surprised by a language, like how little of a problem that is. But that said, this is one of those things you learn over time. You interview, you make sure that you are like very upfront with, hey, I need someone who is like a fluent English speaker, that type of thing. And then you figure it out from the interview with what their level of competency is when it comes to English. Biggest thing though, time zone. So I mentioned that I have, let's see, 15 employees, but in 4 different time zones, right? That is a challenge. I know, Alex, like we talk about this a bit, where like the Filipinos, for example, it's 12 hours ahead. And so you might have someone who's nocturnal. That's actually a big thing over there, is that a lot of people just work at night because that's just what you do, right? Or it's, hey, I need you to, if you're gonna work overnight or if you're gonna work while I'm sleeping, then I need at the end of your shift or at the beginning of your shift that we like meet. And you hear what I'm saying? There's ways to do it, but time zone differences, that's a thing. So yeah. Ghosting. Because, actually, I'll put these two together. Because there's a lack of regulation when it comes to, because they're all independent contractors, obviously. Because of that reason, there's a lot of room for someone to be like, they're 10,000 miles away. So if I just stop responding, nothing happens to me. You hear what I'm saying? And so there is a level of that does happen. But again, you learn these things over time. But this is just my experience.